Representing political party Team for a Livable Vancouver, our guests Grace Quan and Stephen Roberts are here today to discuss some central issues affecting Vancouver residents. Grace joins us as co-founder and CEO of Hydrogen in Motion. In 2018, she was recognized as one of BC's most influential women in the world of STEM by BC Business. STEM, of course, standing for science, technology, engineering, and math. Her passion for the revitalization of Chinatown and the preservation of culture, history, and economic development is best displayed through her work as an activist and a solutionist to issues affecting the downtown east side. Earlier in his career, Stephen worked for large global financial institutions such as Merrill Lynch, ING, and Citibank. This experience provides Team with a unique insight on budgeting and the complexity of cities' finances. After living far away from our West Coast waters in places like New York, London, Hong Kong, and Toronto, Stephen returned to Vancouver with a fresh perspective and new approaches to solving city issues. With mayoral candidate and former Coastal Front guest Colleen Hardwick leading the party, Team wants to make evidence-driven decisions that will make Vancouver a more thriving and livable city. Folks, thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So before we get started in going into the topic of the downtown east side safety and compassion with yourself, Grace, and of course, Stephen, if you want to coin in, let's first, for the listeners and viewers who aren't familiar with your name, maybe they're not even familiar with the brand of Team Livable Vancouver, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves in your own words and about the party?
Myself, I'm Grace Kwan. I'm a resident of Gastown. My mother-in-law and stepdaughter live in Chinatown. So I visit them fairly frequently. So I'm crossing Hastings Street and the downtown east side probably twice or three times a week. And it is the worst I've ever seen it. And it's incredibly dangerous to try to traverse it with the people on the streets, the tents, the paraphernalia, and a whole bunch of things that are really unmentionable. It really makes traversing the downtown east side incredibly stressful. And so that crisis in the downtown inspired me to run for office. And the reason I was asked is because I have a secret background. So prior to being a founder of Hydrogen in Motion, I worked for the federal government. I was the senior advisor to the CFO of the Treasury Board of Canada. We manage Canada's $250 billion budget. So I'm very used to bureaucracy. I ran the Centre of Excellence for Grants and Contributions, and so I know how to bring together multiple levels of government. So that's our secret sauce.
Stephen, how about yourself?
Thanks. I'm here today because in addition to my financial background, I've lately been more involved in community nonprofit organizations, primarily in Vancouver as the president of the Vancouver Hospice Society for 5 years. During that time I was at the hospice, we encountered a rezoning development that affected the very existence of the hospice. Right next door, they planned to build a large development that would have possibly forced us to close. And this was a community facility, for those of you who aren't familiar with hospice, where you can go in your final days of life, your family can come to, and you can be looked after in an atmosphere that's second to none, really, for somebody in a very tragic and difficult situation like that. So we were confronted with this, and I was frankly surprised at the response from the city. So I wanted to get involved because hospice for me is pretty important. It's pretty important that the community facilities that we build that are supported, funded by our community should be protected in a city like ours with compassion. So I'm here in addition to a financial background that I think you spoke about earlier, Andrew. I was at Merrill Lynch and Citibank. My training is in economics. I worked for Coopers & Lybrand in their tax department after university, then went into investment banking where I was the COO in Asia Pacific for Merrill Lynch and Citibank and ING also, as you mentioned. Those things have given me the ability and the understanding of complex business models, complex accounting and budgetary issues, and all of those things affect the city of Vancouver right now. So I'm throwing my hat in as somebody who wants to give back to my community and get involved in helping get Vancouver back on track.
Okay, great intro. Thanks for that, Stephen. I do remember the Vancouver Hospice and that news that came out. I think it was about 3 years ago.
2019, yes.
2019, yeah, it was a big deal. Before we go into these topics, maybe can you talk for a moment about Team for a Livable Vancouver?
Well, yeah, I think Team for a Livable Vancouver, what attracted us to this party is Colleen Hardwick. So she has a background in urban planning. She's the only one who explained to me very clearly why city policy of rezoning is creating this land inflation, which is creating these unaffordable housing, and the spiral is creating these a really negative consequence on the city. I never saw the root cause prior to that, and she's a very, very, very smart woman. I appreciate intelligence. I run a science-based organization. She's very data-based and very all about facts leading to solutions, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and so let's dive right in. And Grace, as we discussed, we talked about yours first. You wanted to talk about the downtown east side and how solutions around that. Look, we have a lot of candidates that will come in here at all levels of government recognizing the same thing we all already recognize, maybe yourself a little more so than everybody else because the amount of time you spend down there, that the downtown east side is a terrible place for a lot of people. It's real tragedy. But they also come in here all kind of proclaiming that they've got a solution. And I mean, there's like literally billions and billions of dollars been spent in the downtown east side, and it's only gotten worse. So last week we had Green candidates Mike Webb and Pete Fry on the show, and they were both honest about the fact that the city has done little to help and improve the downtown east side. So my first question is, as a Vancouverite and local business owner, how and why have things gone so wrong in the downtown east side?
You know, the downtown east side, it's been neglected by the city, and these people living in tents is a massive fire hazard. There's new drugs out there that need to be lit up. So they're no longer ingested, and that's why you see the rise in fires in the last few weeks.
Interesting.
They also cause, in a certain population, a psychosis, and so hence you see the rise in stranger attacks. So what has gone wrong? I think the current council has universally abandoned the downtown east side, and you can see that through the fact that all the washrooms in the parks in the downtown east side are closed. They've removed all the garbage cans out of the downtown east side, basic services. So there's these not-for-profits handing out food in styrofoam and plates, and the people have nowhere to dispose of the garbage, so it's all over the streets. The streets are like an open sewer. It is untenable for everyone who lives there. Everyone is trying to pass through. Anyone who's trying to do a business, it's a crisis situation.
I think it's a multi-level failure of government, not just the city, the federal government, the provincial government. The provincial government is responsible for housing, also responsible for healthcare, both problems that need to be addressed in the downtown east side.
Right.
Also, Vancouver, being the warmest major city in the country, is a destination for people who are going to live on the street or who are going to come for drugs. They've heard Vancouver is a place to go where you'll be not left alone on the streets, where you can get free drugs handed out, and where the climate will actually enable you to stay there on the street. We need to address that and change that. Team's idea is to promote a commissioner for the downtown east side who will be accountable and responsible for results. So we're very focused on being able to actually do something and not just ignore the problem and let it get worse than it's ever been.
Okay, that's an interesting idea. Well, my next question I think you've already almost answered, which is are city staff and local politicians treating the people of the downtown east side with dignity?
I mean, how can living in a tent, living on the street be dignified? The fact that they provide no services, the streets reek in a non-election month, and it's a horrible existence for the people of the downtown east side, and for those businesses that are trying to tough it out, and after 2.5 years of COVID, trying to run a business, and it's spreading to Gastown, Chinatown, and all over the city. You're seeing this that is having a depressing impact on residents and businesses alike.
Let's talk about the police for a moment. I mean, they have to be obviously pretty active in that downtown east side. It's got to be a tough job for those members of the Vancouver Police Department. Do you believe the Vancouver Police Department have enough resources to do their job properly in the downtown east side?
I think the police have been defanged by the current council, so they have been not allowed to do their job. The fire marshal has decreed that the tents were a hazard, which they are. They have propane tanks in them. They're people with anyone who has a walker or a handicap cannot traverse the streets. But the mayor has actually superseded that order and allowed the tents to remain. How is that at all in line with what the services the city is supposed to provide?
And let's not forget, too, Andrew, that this city council voted to defund the police, to take almost $6 million out of their budget.
Yeah.
We've spoken as team, our mayoral candidate, Colleen Hardwick, has spoken with the chief of police. She's spoken with the union of police. And they just want to keep up with population growth. And that's not what's happened over the last 5 years.
Well,
And
yeah, well said.
Just to put in perspective, there's 4 candidates on ABC that all voted to defund the police, and now Ken Sim is saying 100 more police. How does that reconcile between what the mayor candidate says and what the voting record of their councillors? How does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, to digress, they're also a party that said they're going to get rid of the park board. Now
That's right. Now they're running a full slate of 7 park board.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
it's there's a dichotomy between the truth and the action.
Well, if you look at what's happening in Vancouver, and particularly in the downtown east side, it's very similar to what we're seeing happening in San Francisco. We're not necessarily seeing other municipalities with the same despair that we're seeing in Vancouver. Do you have any take as to why? Maybe it's along the lines of what you said, Stephen. Vancouver's a pretty warm city compared to places like Calgary or Edmonton. But do you have any view as to the contrast between other municipalities, major municipalities in Canada, and then that of San Francisco?
I think the laissez-faire attitude of safe supply, letting people alone, leaving them alone on the street, is akin to giving your kid candy and leaving them to run the house and expecting everything to run well. The safe supply is one pillar of 4, and the other 3 pillars of prevention, treatment, and enforcement. It's like trying to sit on a chair with one leg.
Right.
That's why it collapses. And so, back to your question is.
Comparing other major municipalities like Calgary, Winnipeg, obviously Toronto, Montreal, to Vancouver.
Yeah, that book was about what's the mindset, what's the philosophy, and the philosophy of laissez-faire here in Vancouver is doing a disservice to our residents, our cities, and the businesses in Vancouver.
And I think we all remember famously when the Albertan cities or their premier, I think, was buying bus passes for people to come to Vancouver. Go there, they'll look after you there. Ralph Klein, exactly. And San Francisco is a place where we've all been to, I think, probably. And some of us, went there many years ago, and it was a beautiful city. And more recently, it's not. And even there, I think they've decided that it's time to make some changes because they recalled their attorney general in the last few months in a public recall initiative because he was being too permissive on this kind of street difficulty that's been going on. And it's a tragedy, no question, but we can't just close our eyes and ignore it.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's almost like this West Coast culture of Seattle is very similar. I used to spend a lot of time down in Seattle. Got a good friend that's down there. They do a lot of real estate development. He said, Andrew, I haven't been down since COVID happened. And he's like, Andrew, in the last 3-4 years, really the downtown core of Seattle has really changed. It's not an enjoyable place. I said, what about Pike Place Market? And he said, well, you could go right there, but if you walk within 2 or 3 blocks, you're going to see tents, you're going to see needles on the street, you're going to see people suffering. Yeah.
And it's complex, right? I mean, they say we hear the cry housing first, but housing first doesn't help. There's 4 pillars, as Grace just alluded to.
Right.
There's the treatment, there's the prevention, there's the enforcement, and the safe supply. If you just give housing without any of those supports for people, they just end up back out on the street. Yeah. There's a draw for them to go back out, and so we have to understand the complexities of it and do more than just provide housing.
Yeah.
In fact, I just did a blog with Employ to Empower. They operate on Hastings Street actually, and are employing people who are chronically underemployed. And they are in total agreement that with our approach of putting everything under one commissioner, under one house, and finding the inefficiencies. There is over 200 agencies being deployed in the downtown east side, as well as over $1 million a day. I know when I run programs at CEDA, the Canadian International Development Agency, we did an audit on that.
Yeah.
How much actually gets to the recipient? It's less than 25%. So 75 cents on the dollar is going to overhead. I think this is also the case.
This is a good lead-in for my next question. So on the team for Livable Vancouver, on your website, it says that you will commit to performing a detailed audit of the downtown east side to determine the needs of the community, how much funding is being provided, and who these resources are going to, which personally I applaud, because I agree. I think there's a lot of wasted dollars happening down there. What type of audit would you actually do? Like, can you explain? Can you go into a bit more detail around that? And how long do you think the audit would take, and how much would it cost us?
Well, I think it would be both a financial and a outcomes audit, so performance audit, because you need to know who is. We have to find out who's who, and some organizations have a broad mandate and are very efficient, and some are less so. So we have to understand where our efficiencies and who's providing value for service, as you do for any service provider.
Yeah. Okay, Grace, let's talk a bit more about Chinatown, downtown east side. They're intermingled. Reports this week of a stabbing in Chinatown, more broken windows, and vandalism have become the new norm. And it may sound insensitive, but it's the reality. So how would TEAM turn this around?
Well, first of all, I just walked down Chinatown just a couple of days ago. You would see maybe 2 out of 7 places are closed. And I'm talking to some of the owners, and they're closing down. People who've been there 15, 20, 40 years.
Really?
And they're shutting down. Ming Mo, which is a seminal store it's all over Canada.
Yeah.
Their flagship store in Chinatown is shut down.
I saw that news that came out.
Yes, it's a tragedy.
This is the kitchen
That's
supplies.
right.
My
That's
wife
right.
buys all.
I love their stuff.
Probably 2/3 of our kitchenware from
It's
Ming
Ming
Mo.
Mo,
Yeah,
that's
great.
right.
And so they're shutting down their flagship store in Chinatown. Now, why though? What are they telling you?
It's dangerous. It's that there are people coming in, they're stealing their wares, that they're abusive and violent towards their staff. They're afraid for the safety and security of their staff. Their windows are broken. They're graffiti every day. There's human feces, I'm sorry to say this on air, on their doorstep. It is a extremely difficult environment to try to have a business. And they're not seeing a lot of support from the city.
We've met with the downtown BIA as well. The Chinatown BIA.
Yeah.
They tell us that 50% of their costs that they take from their members are for security.
Is that right?
Another 25% to fix up stuff that gets damaged. We're now hearing that the cruise ships and some of the hotels downtown are telling people, don't go to Chinatown because you got to pass Hastings Street to get there.
Wow.
So we're not going to be able to revive that town if we don't do something.
Yeah,
it's time
that's
for action.
incredible.
The city also has bought a number of properties down there, ostensibly to create SROs or housing, and hasn't done anything with them.
Right.
They sit there idle.
Yes.
The city. I mean, the time for action really is now. We've watched this for long enough.
Yeah.
Balmoral has been empty since 2017. They just took down the sign because it's a hazard, but it's actually a fire hazard. So it's been empty for 7 years now, and nobody's doing anything.
Yeah.
And you hear the other parties saying, "Oh, we're going to create housing." You had 4 years to create housing,
Right.
and yet we see no evidence of it.
Yeah.
So many empty lots, and nothing's being built. So it's great to talk, but I think it's time to deliver. That's why we're coming.
Good point. Ken Simmon, the ABC, as you pointed out a little bit earlier, has talked about adding more police officers to our police force. Is that the simple answer for Chinatown? Not so much the downtown east side and the sickness that those people are experiencing with illicit drugs, but when we talk about providing more safety for store owners in downtown east side, is it as simple as just having more cops on the street?
I think the downtown east side, if we take a holistic approach and bring in the other levels of government and get the people off the streets and not have any tents, then the extra police, it won't actually be an issue.
Right.
But one of the things we do want to do, and it's as simple as this team is all about pragmatic solutions.
Okay.
And one of them is about maybe having a self-guided tour from the tour ships, from the cruise ships. Now there's 30,000 people who exit these cruise ships every year. And typically they would come to Chinatown, Gastown.
Yeah.
Why not a self-guided tour, a little yellow brick road, taking them through Gastown. And I've seen so many stranded tourists over at Cordova or coming
Right.
close to Hastings because they're afraid to cross, reasonably so.
Yeah.
That would be cleared off. They would be able to find out about the history of the area. And Chinatown actually has a lot of new items like the Storytelling Center and put up by Carol Lee's family, and the H.Y. Louis family put out a Chinatown display as well. Of course, there's the gardens.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things to see in Chinatown. And
Yeah.
it's always been supported by tourist dollars. So we
Yeah.
get back to that, it would be really back to the basics.
That's a really
It's so
neat, that's a
so
neat
simple,
idea.
right?
Yeah, I mean, like Vancouver has a very rich history with our Chinese immigrants and our
Absolutely.
community, and so like I mean, there's a Chinatown in most towns. I mean,
Yep.
Yeah.
we talk about Victoria. It's got
They have a lovely
one
one.
block of Chinatown, but like
Yeah.
the Chinatown of Vancouver is something else. And to let tourists see that, but do it in a way that's a positive experience and not
Exactly.
see the despair. That's a nice idea.
The Chinatown BIA, in fact, is hoping to get UNESCO World Heritage recognition
Oh.
for the Chinatown in Vancouver.
Okay.
But we're going to have to do some things about the downtown east side
Yeah.
first. I mean, you can't. Well, there's only 3 detox centers operating in the downtown east side, and I'm told that it's 45 days minimum to get into one, even if you've indicated a willingness to go to one.
Really? Wow.
And when Ken Sim says he's going to hire 100 police and 100 mental health officers, well, there aren't 100 mental health officers out there to be hired right now with that expertise.
Yeah.
And also, that is the provincial government's responsibility to hire nurses, not the cities. So we've really got to hold the province to account on this too. We need their help,
Yeah.
but they've got to do their part.
That's right. There's only about 20 detox beds. So when you're in front of a nurse and they offer you a detox, you're in the moment and you're willing to take it, you have to have the bed available. Otherwise, there's no hope. The addiction's up and down, an emotional roller coaster. So when someone's ready to go, you have to have some capacity within the system to take these people in.
For sure. Right. Well said. For sure. Okay. Okay, well, this is a great opportunity for us to transition over to the discussion around city decisions and land zoning, or land rezoning, if you want to talk, Stephen. So let me start by making a comment. Over the last 4 years, I think everyone can point out to several decisions made by the city where we just shake our heads, and there's a lot of frustration and confusion. Out of curiosity, if you look at the last 4 years, was there any one or two decisions, maybe the one about your Vancouver hospice, that you can talk about that was really that impetus for you?
Well, yeah. So as we alluded to earlier,
Yeah.
I was the chair of the Vancouver Hospice Society, and we were confronted with the rezoning application. And it was early in this council's term. It was June of 2019, so they were relatively green. That was the one and only rezoning over the last 4 years that they kicked back and rejected. So they said, no, the hospice is too great a risk for closure. We can't accept this development proposal. That 1 out of 240 rezoning applications.
They did go back and
Yeah.
get it approved.
But exactly. So some of the councillors at the time said, well, if the parking was a little less and if this was a little different, then maybe I could have supported it. So we saw the writing on the wall, and we decided to work with the developer and say, maybe if you did this and did that, we could come to some sort of arrangement.
Right.
And the developer modified their plans accordingly and went back to city council with it again and said, here we got a new plan with the hospice sort of buying into it. So would you go for it? Okay. And they went for it. But the other one I really want to point out is
Yeah.
St. Augustine School and the SRO that BC
Oh, my
Housing wants to
goodness.
build
Yeah,
at
this is a hot
Arbutus and
topic for a
7th.
lot of our listeners. I'll tell you that right
Big
now.
hot topic.
Yeah,
So
but for those who don't know what we're talking about, so this is the school that's a independent
the St. Augustine's
school.
private
Yeah.
school in Kitsilano at 8th and Arbutus.
Yeah.
Next door to that, there's a children's play park. There's also a liquor store nearby and a women's shelter very close as well. And the proposal from BC Housing is a 13-story tower in that neighborhood, which doesn't have any towers like that, for 139 mentally ill and drug-addicted men. speakers from academia, from law enforcement, all came out and said, bad idea to put this many people with those challenges in a neighborhood like this. The residents said, let's not do that here as well. They even offered up another plan for BC Housing to maybe do a low-cost single-parent family home that they could put in the neighborhood that might work better. City Council just said no. They just said no. ABC said no. The NPA said, she said no, she would not approve it. But ABC approved it. The Greens approved it. The mayor approved it. Everybody went against. Hundreds of people speaking at the public hearings, thousands writing in against the experts, except for Colleen Hardwick, who also said no, it shouldn't happen. But the rest of City Council voted for it. And the rest of us are scratching our heads, wondering why.
Yeah. So I guess the point being that this is why you're running is because you're seeing these kind of decisions being made and feel like these people are not being very responsible in some pretty big decisions that could really impact a community.
100%. Our byline at Team for Livable Vancouver is a voice for all neighborhoods, because we think the people who live here and have lived here, who pay their property taxes and who contribute to their community, are the people we should be listening to, asking them what form of development should we have in your neighborhood, not just running roughshod over them. Yeah. We've seen evidence that there's further contempt from the mayor and from Ken Sim at ABC. Two all candidates debates have been canceled this week because those two won't show up.
Right.
Because they don't want to hear from a coalition of neighborhoods, which is organizing one, that would like to hear from people about how we're going to respect neighborhood voices as we grow and develop. Because Vancouver for sure is growing. It has been growing. We're all excited to see growth in many regards. Yeah. It makes our city more diverse and more interesting. But it's not up to the development community to run that growth. It's up to the City Hall to manage that growth and to make sure the residents are respected in that.
It's blows my mind that we have like legitimate mayoral candidate quorums or debates being set up by community members or community groups, and people are not, and mayoral candidates are not showing up.
Right.
Like I just can't believe that. I mean, it makes me wonder, like, well, what, like, how come? Like, don't you want to? Shouldn't you be telling everybody why you should be elected?
For sure you should. And Mayor Kennedy took some heat at an all candidates debating at the Jewish synagogue on 55th and Oak last week. He took some heat there. Sure, you're the mayor. You've been sitting on policies for the last 4 years. You're going to get some heat. If you're not following what the city wants.
I think they went at each other pretty hard, both of them. Yeah. The two KSs, as we call them fondly. Right. But you know, if they don't participate, then they can spin our message of thoughtful growth into a NIMBYism.
We should talk about that because that's kind of what you've been hearing from these two parties is that you guys are anti-development. So maybe why don't we jump to that? Is that true?
So that's name calling because they want to silence us, right?
Right.
They don't want to hear our voices. They want to label us with that and try to attract away from our program. Yeah. Our program is not about preventing development. We have a small scale developer on our team. Param Nijar specializes in building laneway homes and in gentle densification. Right. We want to see a city grow. We want to see that happen. We want to also hold developers to account. We've been doing all this rezoning, inflating land prices in the process, because every time you zone from one family or two family up to 40, 100 families in one space, you're going to raise the value of the land. And that we expect money from the developer on top of that, which further inflates the price of the land and the price of the units he builds. Right. Now, City Council currently thinks that there's a free lunch, that the developers are just rich and benevolent, and they're just going to give us millions of dollars. Well, they're not. They're going to charge every citizen in Vancouver whatever they've had to pay to City Hall to get the right to build the
that
property.
Cost goes to the buyer at the end of the day.
There's only one taxpayer. There's only one buyer at the end of the day, and they're the guys who are going to have to pay for it. Yeah. City Hall doesn't seem to understand that. Well, one of the concrete proposals we want to bring in to help improve affordability is requiring people who are the beneficiaries of a rezoning or of a development application that increases density to actually act on it. We've seen properties around the city where they've been approved. The city said, go ahead, you've got the rezoning, you've got the application approved, and the developer does nothing. Yeah. Think of the Safeway site out at West Point Gray, sitting there for years now. Yeah. An anchor tenant for that neighborhood, gone, nothing replaced it, and the other businesses there are dying because people go elsewhere. Yeah. So we've proposed bringing in some requirements that if once you've got your rezoning, maybe it's 6 months, you got to start building. Yeah. If you don't, you lose it. Yeah. Or if you've got a development application that's been approved, move on it or lose it.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to have respect the time value of money. Yeah. Right. And they're not doing these developments. They're using our land, the city land, to speculate, essentially, off, and the people who have to pay for that are the citizens of Vancouver.
To be a bit of a devil's advocate here, I mean, are there any decisions that City Council has made with respect to land development and zoning over the last 4 years that you can apply? Is there something that you can say, well, there is one, and it was this?
Well, I can applaud, of course, the hospice rejection the first time because they heard us.
Okay.
Finally, it was hard. It was really hard. We had elderly folks whose relatives had maybe died in the hospice, had to turn out 3 or 4 nights in a row for public hearings, and they approved it. One other one that is a little bit off of the rezoning, but I can applaud this council for, is finally bringing in an auditor general for Vancouver, because Vancouver is the only major city in Canada that did not have one.
I know, it's amazing. And it was Colleen who brought that.
And it was Colleen Hardwick who managed. She tried many times. It was hard.
Yeah.
She had to do. I think there was a little horse trading involved, but she had to work with her council members, and she finally got it in. We got it passed. And that guy has now issued his first report, I think, in early 2022.
Yeah.
So
His plan.
that I am proud of them for getting done finally.
Okay,
But
good.
it was Colleen who really pushed that one.
Yeah. I don't think city staff really wanted that. Who wants to have
gosh,
someone else to actually make you accountable? And
Gosh,
and,
no.
and I actually think that part of the reason a lot of the city council mayor didn't approve it didn't embrace it right away is because they honestly just don't even necessarily know how to read a balance sheet.
That's
but
all
it's not-
fair.
yeah.
That's a great point, is that there's a lot of not so great qualified people in the current that are running for council or running for mayor who think that running a bureaucracy is the same as running a business.
Yeah.
I've done both, and it is nothing similar. We have in the federal government, we're running 300,000 employees, $250 billion, public accounts, quarterly reports, unions, all levels of statutory and other regulations that you don't have as a business. A business is really just transactional. But when you're managing the public purse, it's much more complex, much more stakeholders, and a lot more thoughtful debate needs to be going into understanding these financial statements.
Right. We had John Kupar, the former NPA mayoral candidate. In fact, the day that we were going to launch was 20 minutes before we were launching his interview with us, which was a great interview. He announced that he was stepping down. But in that interview, he highlighted the fact that the city of Vancouver actually owns a lot of vacant land, and that this land could be used for developing projects, namely around the world in the form of housing. Why does the city not develop this land, and instead they're going after these sort of controversial issues over rezoning? Like, would that not be a solution?
So John was partially correct. There is a Vancouver City Property Endowment Fund, and I emphasize the word endowment. It was actually set up coincidentally by Art Phillips, who was the original team mayor back in 1974.
Okay.
So we're not that team, but we take our inspiration from that team.
Right.
And that fund was set up by Art Phillips then. It's worth $7 to $8 billion now. It's designed to rent out its properties and earn income from it at a market rate. 50% of the revenues are supposed to go into the operating budget for the city, and the other is supposed to be returned to the fund. Any sales or transitions from the fund are supposed to go back into the fund itself. Okay. As I said, it's an endowment. It's for the future of the city. It's an inheritance that we're passing along, to our future children. You can take things out of the fund with a 2/3 vote of majority of council.
Yeah.
But then that money goes back in once you've sold it. So you could use it. The properties are supposed to be used for civic purposes. Ultimately, there's a long-term view there. Maybe we need a new art gallery or a civic theater or something, but housing could fit into that, with the proviso, of course, that you put the money back into the city's endowment fund afterwards. Now, one reason we're not doing that, of course, is that the city's addicted to revenue generation from property developers.
Right.
They actually have a rezoning plan. The Broadway plan, 500 blocks of rezoning, is built around how much money can the city extract from the developers every time they build something in the new Broadway plan.
And this is through the form of CACs.
CACs and development cost levies. There's two ways we hit the developers up,
okay.
Right? So by doing that with the Broadway plan, you're going to get a lot more money in for the city.
Yeah.
Than to sell something that's out of the property fund, endowment fund. So again, it is an endowment fund, but there are ways in which you can take land out for a legitimate city purpose.
Right. So would you support that?
I'd have to look at an individual application, I think,
Okay.
but because I don't want to take away from the Endowment Fund. I think that's an important legacy
Yeah.
for us to carry on with. Because if we empty it, then where are we at?
Yeah.
We don't have anything left.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would look at every application, I think, on its own merits and make sure that the money ends up back in the fund.
Yeah. Okay.
But two points on that is
Yeah.
one is affordable housing. Doing it through the market is not going to get you affordable housing right now. The Kennedy Stewart's proposal of 80% below market rate is it's 20% below the sky. It's $2,500 is market for one bedroom, so it's $2,000. Who can afford $2,000 for one bedroom?
Right.
It's sky high. We should go back to CMHC definition of affordability, which is 30% of your income.
Right.
That's what the rest of Canada is using.
Yeah.
Why does Vancouver allow the developers set a new target for affordability such that they can sell more units?
Before you go on to that, can I just add?
Yeah.
That the City of Vancouver staff's definition of affordable housing is anything you can rent because you don't need a down payment. When I was opposing the hospice development, we said these are going to be $5,000 a month rental units. And they said, but it's affordable because there's no down payment required. You can just move in and rent. That's what the City of Vancouver thinks affordable housing is. But sorry, Grace, keep going.
It's completely out of touch. But to your point about the Endowment Fund, I think we need to recognize that we have to bring in the other levels of government, so the provincial and the federal funds to actually make affordable housing. So there is the social housing, which is False Creek South is a good example. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, right? Social housing, subsidized housing for people who are working, and then the market rate. That's a model that worked. That was brought in by Colleen Hardwick's, Walter Hardwick's. And it's something that we could address again. It's a possibility.
Okay, good. I want to highlight a policy of one of your sort of competitors, I guess, in this race. Last week we had One City on our podcast, and we talked about their housing plan, and specifically, they want to allow anyone who owns a single-family residential property to be able to demolish that property and insert a 4-level strata building or a 6-story all-rental building with no public engagement. You get automatic. And I actually got really specific. We talked about West 10th because I think while there's probably lots that you disagree on, I think one common theme was West 10th Village and its demise with the loss of Safeway. I live up in that area, and Christine Boyle recognized that as well. When I asked Christine, I said, just to make sure we're clear, you look at that, say, for example, West 11th, which is just south of West 10th in that area. So if I buy the third house in on a 33-foot wide lot by 140 feet, you're saying that under your policy, I should be able to just, blow up that house and insert a 6-story all-rental building, casting a massive shadow over the houses next to us. And she pointed out, well, you could also build a massive house and cast a shadow anyways. So I'm going a little bit long into this one, but I'm sure you're familiar with this policy. Yeah. So do you support this kind of idea that we should be able to allow anybody that owns a 33-foot by 120-foot lot to take that home down and rebuild with a 4 to 6-story building? Do you like that idea?
It's an appalling idea. It's completely anti-democratic. It goes against everything we know about city planning and about zoning. When you buy a home, you're making one of the biggest, probably the biggest investment decision of your life. And you look to city rezoning and the neighborhood to inform your decision. Am I on a major highway here that's going to be turned into multifamily or even commercial space in the next few years? Or am I going to go to a neighborhood and, hey, I can have some security here. I can relax and raise my children.
Right.
Maybe, look after my parents when they need help as well. You're making a long-term investment decision. And that's what zoning is all about. Zoning shouldn't be spot rezoning or just changing the purpose or use of a piece of land just because you feel like it, just because some guy can make a bunch of money. Zoning is about helping people make longer term investment decisions. And it's about businesses and it's about people, it's about individuals. And it's not acceptable to just say, okay, to hell with my neighbors.
Right.
I'm just going to build this really offensive thing. I've traveled around.
Well, maybe just to pause for a second. And again, I'm just to be devil's advocate here, Stephen. I don't think Christine's the kind of person who's trying to help developers make a bunch of money. I think if she was sitting in the seat, she would say, well, look, what this does is it just creates more livable units on current land very quickly, this policy. And so it doesn't solve all the problems, but it does allow for a lot of homes. And there are some locations, you could say, take a corner lot that's, on a very busy street, like we've seen what's happened in the Canby corridor there, and turn those into something that's a much more higher densification. So if I was just to be devil's advocate, isn't there some merit to that?
So I think there's the narrative that we're so short of housing that we just need to destroy existing narratives, and I would push back against that narrative.
Okay.
We've done 240 rezonings in the last 4 years, many before that. We understand the pipeline of housing is up to 100,000 units, not yet built, but already given permission and approval to be built. So the crisis is not so much that we need to approve more rezoning and destroy neighborhoods. It's how do we get this stuff built?
Right.
How do we ensure that developers and people applying for these rezonings get them done? Also, I have a problem with spot rezoning as opposed to a wholesale neighborhood rezoning. So
Right.
the Canby corridor, in my humble
So
opinion,
before you go into your, can you explain for the listener what the difference is? So in layman's terms, what's spot rezoning versus whole neighborhood rezoning?
Sure. So spot rezoning is something that the hospice was subject to. So we were in a street of single-family lots along Granville Street, all about the same size. Next door was a single-family home next door to the hospice. The hospice was built on a property to look like a single-family home. The developer applied to put in 21 units on that single-family lot. And it was under a program called the Affordable Rental Housing Spot Rezoning Plan. And one lot every 10 blocks was allowed to benefit from this. And so once the first guy got in and applied, no one else was allowed to apply. So you win the lottery, you get to build whatever you want on your little lot, and everyone else has to live with it. Whereas you take a wholesale rezoning or a neighborhood rezoning like Canby Corridor, and you say, okay, all the way from, I think it's 25th King Edward down to 41st or 49th, we're going to allow multifamily units up to 6 stories. And I think that's about what they are. And if you ask me, that one's kind of working. It looks nice. It looks pretty.
I think
it's
it
not
looks
too
great.
high. It looks like
Imagine-
Europe or somewhere.
Yeah.
It's the buildings are nice quality. It looks pretty good.
Yeah.
That's taking a whole area and saying, all of you have the same opportunity to sell if you wish, develop if you wish, move away if you wish,
Yeah.
but also to stay there if you wish to. So the area itself is changed,
Right.
not one at a time. Let's put something really objectionable next to these guys. And if you do open this up, like as Christine Boyle suggested, the developer's first target is places where they can make money. And guess what? It's not the parts of town where we actually need more affordable housing. It's, hey, this little leafy area, I can make a lot more money selling these units in Shaughnessy or Kerrisdale than I
Yeah.
can make selling them over in Fraserview or Sunrise
point.
Hastings. So the developers are going to migrate to those places.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, we're not anti-development at all. We are in favor of growing this city, but at the city's management, not at the developer's behest.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Good
think
point.
that what Christine was talking about is the Vancouver Plan, and what it is really is the Vancouver Special 2.0. So the Vancouver Special was essentially a house that was pre-approved, a structure and a plan that's already stamped. So you come to City Hall and say, I have a lot, I want to build this house, I have the Vancouver Plan, bang, it's done. So they've taken that concept and they rolled it into duplex, fourplex, sixplex, and a 13 or six story, and also even higher, actual high rise. So they're cookie cutter and they'll be allowed anywhere. And what you'd get is a very dysfunctional looking city and very ugly. It would be all the same. So if you want the Vancouver Plan 2.0, that's what it is.
That's what you're going to get. One of the things I would say from my times I've spent with talking to Colleen, as well as having her as a guest on Coastal Front, that I like is her concept of putting sort of a lot more voice and power back into the hands of the local neighborhoods, so that Dunbar has a different look and feel, and Dunbar decisions are made by the people who live in Dunbar, and those in Marpool have something different to for their neighborhood than those who are in commercial versus the people in Yaletown.
Yeah, the houses in the apartments in Chinatown has a very specific look, like the Chinese
Yes.
from the South China look.
Yeah.
And I don't think you'll want that all over the city.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
So
right.
why would you have these block forms all over the city?
Yeah.
It's the same principle.
And
Yeah.
Andrew, I don't know if you remember, I don't remember them, but there used to be community offices of City Hall in every neighborhood
Right.
where you could go in and chat about potential development in the neighborhood and how you might like to see the neighbor grow. And our proposal is to bring that kind of thing back, where you go to the neighborhoods and you say, we need to get another 2,000 people into this neighborhood in the next 15 years. What form of development would work for you guys that would make this work? What else would you want at the same time? Should we rezone so we can have light retail or some small businesses as well in the same area,
Yeah.
and then build up a little bit, do more quadruplexes, do some 6-story buildings?
Sure.
But consult with those neighborhoods because they all have their unique character.
Yeah.
I drove by on Dunbar yesterday night, and there's one of those Christine Boyle 6-story apartment block applications in the middle of the street, south of 41st, where it's all houses, all single-family houses,
Yeah.
and there's one application for a 6-story apartment building in a single-family lot.
The great thing about these community houses would also fast track permitting. So, right now the permit regime has gone from, a couple months to do renovation to 2 years. I've heard horror stories of people just giving up.
Yeah.
And, if you have this local community, you could turn around that kind of permitting very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And the planning department has twice as many people as it had 4 years ago. But
Really?
permits take
Does
twice
it
as
really?
long. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, we're going to go into our final topic around financial accountability. As city councillor, your lead for your party, Team for Livable Vancouver, Colleen Hardwick, was key in the installation of our Auditor General, Mike McDonald, who we spoke about a little bit earlier. And you'd mentioned the fact that he submitted his first audit plan back in January. If elected, are you prepared to act on his findings in this audit?
That's why we have this guy, 100%. It's a critical process to holding our elected representatives accountable to us, frankly. The auditor's going in there on an impartial basis to look at things, to make recommendations about efficiency, about fraud, about waste, a whole host of issues that we as citizens need to know about. And it behooves us to follow the recommendations and fix things.
And just to clarify, Stephen, that's it's the bureaucracy we're holding to account, not the elected officials.
Absolutely. Well, after the bureaucracy, then the head elected officials.
One of my observations as I've kind of dove into the world of politics at all three levels and seen how cities work is there's almost like two challenges here. One is you got to get enough of the right people on city council to make things move ahead. And we've had a bit of a dysfunctional city council for the last 4 years. But even if you did, like let's say, you guys were going to do it. Let's say you got everybody running for city council got elected and Colleen becomes mayor and you become like this, force that you're able to kind of push things through, a majority, right? Mm-hmm. You still have to deal with this bureaucracy of City Hall and a culture there that's been built over decades. A lot of my observations, a lot of the people that work at City Hall, especially at the higher up levels, kind of look at you folks as just, people they got to deal with for 4 years and then someone else replaces you. Mm-hmm. How do you address the issue of culture in a city like that and kind of changing that course to something from, over, bureaucratic kind of culture of like non-performance to one of like stripping it down to being more efficient? You mentioned earlier, just a few minutes ago, that the number of people in the planning department's doubled.
Yeah, it has.
In the last 4 years.
It has, exactly.
But it takes longer to get approvals. So how do you change that?
So there's been empire building, no question.
And great description.
To go back into a little bit of history, as Colleen would say, when Vision came in 2008-9, Judy Rogers was the longtime city manager. She was fired right away. They brought in Penny Ballum to be the new city manager. She was a doctor, didn't have any city management expertise at all, but she had a binder this big that she was supposed to act on. And she started to clean house. She took out the people that were in the way of Vision's vision. That situation still holds today. So the same people are still in those positions because with this current council, there's been no majority. It's been difficult to get unanimity or even a majority view on many issues. So there's been no move to act. Also, I would think everyone on this council is first-time councillor. Oh no, Adrian Carr is not.
Two aren't.
Melissa
DiGenova and
right,
Adrian
but
Carr.
the other 9 are all green.
Yeah.
Don't know the history, maybe a little unfamiliar with how staff works, and they're relying on staff recommendations. Now, team believes in giving everyone an opportunity to move with the times. If the people of Vancouver elect a team majority and we're in there, everyone will have an opportunity to work with us and help us to achieve the agenda we were elected to put in place. If they don't, well, then we'll have to look at what we need to do to change staffing in City Hall, because they really need to be there for the citizens of Vancouver, not for some sort of vision that was someone else's years back.
Okay.
Well, I used to work in bureaucracy, and so
Yeah.
that's
You
what
know
I
this
do.
world.
That's what I do.
Okay.
So
But you're also a CEO of a private business, a founder of a private business. So
that's correct.
fill me in, Grace. Like, how do you change that culture?
Change management is about transparency and accountability. So people have to know that what they're doing is being watched and noted, and that they're accountable for the actions. Once you have set that process in, typically you'll get the results that you're looking for.
Next question. How are you going to save taxpayers money?
Well, in every budget, there's at least 10, 15, 20% of non-essential goods. We've all managed our own personal budgets to know that maybe that pair of shoes is not necessary today. Yes, there's definitely always a little fat to cull in every herd.
Do you have any specific ideas, either of you, the two of you, that you've looked at?
Well, there's a lot of passion. There's a lot of vanity projects that are on the books right now. Like, for who's going to sue big oil for the city of Vancouver? We are a peanut compared to the behemoth. This is a federal responsibility.
Yeah,
Why are we taking on?
Yeah, the Green Party in City Hall brought it forward as a motion and got it approved. $700,000 of your tax
hard-earned
money
cash,
down the drain in a lawsuit against fossil fuel companies for 120 years of contributing to climate change, which actually we all participated in because we bought their stuff. So how does that exactly advance the taxpayer? On the website, sorry to keep going, that we have for team, someone's pulled out my bio that says, we have to be very careful with other people's money. I'm not sure when I said it, but I probably say it a lot, because I'd rather spend mine than spend yours as a taxpayer. Because every time you want to add to somebody's budget, you have to have a really good reason why you're going to do that. Why do you need to get more money from the pocket of this taxpayer? Taxes have gone up 25% over the last 4 years. And that was in a low inflation environment. What are these guys going to do next now that inflation's hit 7-8%? And they're going to say, well, we have to keep up with inflation. Do you want a property tax bill that goes up 8% all in 1 year next year? I don't think so. The climate change plan is $500 million. Included all kinds of things to get money out of the residents' pockets, like road pricing and things like that. Those kind of things are not necessary. In climate action, we all want to save and preserve our environment and leave the planet better off for the future. But it's not the city of Vancouver's responsibility to spend $500 million on an action plan. It's the federal government and, to a certain extent, the provincial government's responsibility. The city can participate and work with that, but we're not going to solve the climate crisis ourselves in Vancouver. We can participate. No. I was there at the capital plan presentation. There's no move to change the fleet of city cars to electric or hydrogen.
Yes.
There's no move afoot there. So what's the climate change plan about exactly?
And
Taxpayers.
There's $350 million downloaded from senior levels of government. So that's responsibility of the province or responsibility of federal. The city of Vancouver is taking on $350 million. That's a lot of money.
Okay, this has been a great conversation, Stephen and Grace. I'm sure a lot of other people have enjoyed listening to this. They like what they hear, they like what they see. How can people get involved? And maybe you can talk a little bit about your overall team at Team.
So we've got a full slate of councillors, 6 of us running in addition to Colleen Hardwick for mayor. Grace and I, of course, are running. We also have Bill Tillman, who is a consultant, has his own business, who might be famous for leading the campaigns against the HST and against PR. There's Param Nijar, who is a small-scale developer focusing on gentle density and laneway houses. We have Sean Nardi, who is an IT professional and manager from the financial services area. And we have Cleta Brown, who is a lawyer, a former Crown prosecutor, and general counsel to the Office of the Ombudsman. So we think we've got a slate of great folks who want to get out there and participate. I might add, we're probably all reluctant councillors, but we think we need to get involved for the sake of the community and for the sake of Vancouver. As Grace would say, you got to get out there and vote first.
Yeah, and I would plead to you to vote the team slate and only the team slate, because we don't want to waste your precious votes on other parties. We need to win a majority to make our really innovative changes, policies happen.
If you want to see this change that we've talked about happen, we need to have a majority on council. We believe fundamentally that the democratic process requires that we listen to neighborhoods and people in the city. It's up to the city's council to manage growth, not let others run it for us.
Well said. Okay, Grace Quan, Stephen Roberts, 2 of the 6 candidates running for city council in the upcoming Vancouver election taking place on October 15th. You're with Team for Livable Vancouver. Thanks for being on Coastal Front today, and best of luck.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for having us.